Hello, class. We'll begin actually now looking at the first chapter and the first ideal. We see wedding day reflections here, preparing for the wedding feast. Let's look at verse number 1. The Song of Songs, which is Solomon's, may he kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. Verse 1 records the title, Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. That's the Hebrew rendition, but we have it all in the English as well. And author by Solomon. As a superlative, the title may indicate this is the best of Solomon's 1005 songs, or that it is the best of all songs. In either case, the song sets before its readers a paradigm for romantic love and courtship and marriage. We see in verse number 2, the Song of Songs begins as Shulamit expresses her desire to be kissed by Solomon. This is because she considered his love to be better than wine. Here, the Hebrew word dad for love, translated into English as love, refers to sexual love. It is equivalent to the Greek word eros. When Shulamit spoke of Solomon's love, she was referring to the physical expressions of his love. While getting ready for the wedding feast, she is already longing to go beyond the feast. Thus, her first stated desire is actually a desire for their first sexual union, which will consummate the marriage. Let's read verse number 3. Your oils have a pleasing fragrance. Your name is like purified oil. Therefore, the maidens love you. In verse 3, Shulamit states a second reason for her desire, that is, the fragrance and quality of Solomon's love. At the wedding banquet, the entire palace will be sprinkled with perfume. Yet the fragrance of Solomon's love surpasses the fragrance of the royal palace. In fact, all the fragrances are surpassed by the very fragrance of Solomon's name alone. His name, like pour forth oil, is sprinkled far and wide. To Shulamit, Solomon's name is like this kind of ointment. In light of all this, it is no wonder that the young maidens of marriageable age had the longing to become Solomon's choice before Shulamit was finally chosen to be the one. Let's read verse 4. Draw me after you, and let us run together. The king has brought me into his chambers. We will rejoice in you and be glad. We will extol your love more than wine. Rightly do they love you. In verse 4, Shulamit expresses a second desire. She says, draw me after you and let us run together. While the first desire was for sexual love, the second desire was for the emotional expression of love, which gives sexual love its meaning. The practice of sexual love, dad, the Hebrew word dad, apart from the emotion and will of another kind of love, ahava, reduces it to lust. In answer to Shulamit's two desires, in verse 2 and 4a, comes the refrain, the king has brought me into his chambers. This brings a response from the daughters of Jerusalem. The daughters of Jerusalem will be glad and rejoice because of Shulamit. Furthermore, they praise Shulamit's enjoyment of sexual love more than wine. The Hebrew word ahava is used for love in the line, rightly do they love you. The daughters of Jerusalem appeared to be agreeing with one another that the couple had an ideal romance and that they were happy for Shulamit. Verse 5, Shulamit says, I am black but lovely, O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. The praise having just emanated from the daughters of Jerusalem in verse 4 makes Shulamit conscious of her swarthy complexion. She expresses humility, but also acknowledges that she is beautiful too. The expressions of humility begin with, I am black. The idea is not that she is black naturally, but that her skin is becoming dark from being overly exposed to the sun. The humility, however, is contrasted with the statement that she is becoming beautiful too. She makes another contrast using a simile, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. The tents of Kedar is parallel to I am black and refers to the black tents of the Bedouins. These were generally made of black goat skins and hair. The tent curtains of Solomon is parallel to but lovely and refers to Solomon's pleasure tent. Verse 6. Do not stare at me because I am swarthy, for the sun has burned me. My mother's sons were angry with me. They made me caretaker of the vineyards, but I have not taken care of my own vineyard. Shulamit recognizes both her shortcomings and her strengths. She explains how her complexion got that way. Her brothers forced her to work in the family vineyards, which provides very little shade. Thus she was scorched with the sun on the exposed parts of her body, and this is the reason for her swarthy complexion. The mention of her very own vineyard is actually a reference to her own feminine beauty and charms. She failed to take care of her own physical appearance and let her complexion become swarthy here and there. Yet, regardless of that physical appearance and regardless of the contrast with the fair-skinned palace girls, it was with Shulamit that Solomon fell in love. She was the one that he wanted. Verse 7, Tell me, O you whom my soul loves, where do you pasture your flock? Where do you make it lie down at noon? For why should I be like one who veils herself besides the flocks of your companions? The fact that Solomon fell in love and wanted Shulamit reminds her of an incident during her courtship with him. Solomon the king began courting her by posing as a simple shepherd and by withholding his true identity. In this verse, verse 7, she recalls her unsuccessful attempts to discover the strange shepherd's identity. Her question was, where do you pasture your flock? Where do you make it lie down at noon? Solomon had won her love, but he was still silent concerning himself. So Shulamit asked herself, why should I go around looking for him as a veiled woman looking for a man, thus creating the wrong impression? Like one who veils herself refers to the practice of a prostitute. And you see that in Genesis chapter 38, verses 14 and 15. She seeks to know exactly where Solomon can be found so that it will not appear that she is a prostitute walking aimlessly around looking for a male consort. And now we come to verse number 8. If you yourself do not know, most beautiful among women, go forth on the trail of the flock and pasture your young goats by the tents of the shepherds. The answer to Shulamit's questions comes from the daughters of Jerusalem in verse 8 here. Shulamit was advised of her need to resolve the conflict of her love for Solomon. She ought to go where he may be found. Eventually, the true identity of the shepherd is revealed. It is Solomon the king. Having found out that it was Solomon, Shulamit must choose whether or not to marry Solomon and follow his footsteps, which is now obvious to her. It is a royal palace in Jerusalem. It is a conflict that must be resolved. With this instruction and admonition from the daughters of Jerusalem, the first recollection comes to an end.